Hey guys, Captain Andrew here with fishheadwaterslake.com. I want to talk to you guys a little bit today about flukes. One of my favorite baits. If you've ever fished with me, you've heard me talk about the value of learning how to fish a fluke. Super versatile bait. As far as soft plastics, I think you can do just about anything with with a fluke. You can work this thing as a top water. You can work it down deep. You can work this thing all over the place. So I really enjoy using a fluke. Then I want to tell you a couple of ways about how I use it here at Headwaters Lake. Now this may be something that helps you back at your home lake, but here at Headwaters, this is something that that helps me be really successful. With the artificial bite fishing with the fluke. Now, of course, I make my own flukes. I call them a jerk shad. It's a pretty simple a simple bait. It's pretty much like most of the ones out there on the market. So nothing extraordinary necessarily about it, but I do like this particular shape. I just happen to really dig this one. So this is a 5 1/4 inch, so it's a full size fluke. This one has a tail that's sideways instead of the up and down, flat sort of a tail. So it has a tail like a natural fish. It has a little belly slot in there to help a hook go through. So this is my favorite fluke. So this is typically what I'm throwing out here. It's a 5 1/4, 5 1/2 inch, something like that. I don't think you need to throw anything smaller than that out here. For the size of fish that we've got out here and how hungry they are, I think this size is is perfect. I've also got some 7 inch variety that I'll throw sometimes too. If I feel like I just need a bigger chunk of bait, then I've got a big 7 inch that I'll throw too. Rigging them the same way and everything, so basically just translate over to the the larger size. This bait's got some salt in it, so it's nice and dense. It's heavy. It's made with a neutrally buoyant plastic, so it doesn't sink straight away, but it doesn't float either. It's just regular worm plastic. It's regular plastisol, so it's not elastic or anything like that. But the little bit of salt gives it a little bit of flavor and also adds a little bit of weight, so you can chuck this thing a mile. Even with a bait caster. So it's a nice heavy bait, but still relatively neutrally buoyant. So this is what we're going to talk about. So a couple of different ways that I rig a fluke here at Headwaters. Now keep it in mind, most of the lake here is 4 or 5 feet deep. That's typically where we're targeting fish with this type of a bait. So this is something that I'm going to use when the sun comes up a little bit. When I want to find fish that are submerged down in that hydrilla, along the edges of the hydrilla. It's basically something I'm going to use in weedy cover as something that I'm going to pull through that cover, trying to incite strikes. I can use it as a top water bait, if there's a lot of grass and that kind of stuff around, by using it, use it a little bit faster. It just depends on how I rig the thing. But it's always going to be weedless, because we've got so much cover here. There's no need for a heavy weight or anything with this, because we are fishing relatively shallow here in the lake. I'm using this thing around reeds and pads and mainly in the hydrilla. So I don't need a big heavy weight. I don't want this thing burying itself down in the hydrilla. So everything I'm going to show you is going to be relatively light. So my primary way of rigging this bait almost all of the time is just with a weedless worm hook, type of a hook. So just a weedless hook. This one is a spring lock hook. It's got the little twisty thing on the front. I think this one actually is a trocar. So the spring lock, I think works really well. It holds that bait on. And this particular one, the head on my baits are relatively big, so you can put a screw lock in there without any problem. So I think the screw lock holds it on really well. It saves the bait. A fish bites it and it doesn't usually pull the screw lock out. So the hook will just come undone. You catch a fish and the baits will last a little bit longer. You can catch multiple fish on each bait. All right. Typically, when I rig with a screw lock, I use a uni knot. So if you use a uni or a Polymar or a double overhand granny switch, whatever, the basic thing is it's tight up against the hook. It's not loose. So I'm going to show you a loop knot in a little bit, but this one is tight up against the hook. The reason that I do that is that screw lock will have a tendency to get twisted, and things, get all out of whack. The worm will twist around it and that kind of a thing, if I'm not careful. So I kind of keep the knot in one place, when I'm using the screw lock type of hook. No matter which way I hook it, it's always going to be weedless, and it depends on how the bite is, on how I hook this hook. Now, right now I've got it hooked buried in the bait, so there's no hook exposed, anything like that. So super thick cover. If I'm pulling it through the pads, that kind of stuff, and if the fish are showing me that they're going to bite nice and hard, then this is the way that I'm typically going to hook it. An awful lot of times I'll run that hook all the way through the bait. Okay, I'm going to measure it and see where it needs to come through at. I kind of get an idea where with my finger, where it's going to come through. I try to go through it 90-degree angle, come out in the middle, so it's nice and straight, right? And then you guys are aware how to do a little skin hook. So just a little piece of plastic back over the tip of the hook. So now I have a relatively weedless bait, but if a fish taps it or bites it really gently, it'll pop right out, and I've got the barb going on right there. That's kind of tough when you're throwing it in the pads and some really thick stuff, because you'll have a tendency to get hooked. That's when I'm going to do the whole, the hook buried inside the plastic itself. The other thing about having the belly slot is, once this thing, you go through a few fish, through bites, and it starts to tear a little bit, you can rearrange where the hook goes through at, so you can get a little more use out of it. Move it to the left, move it to the right, get some more use out of it. Okay, with my hooks, whether it's this hook or some of the other hooks that I'm going to show you, extra wide gap, the widest gap that I can get. So I do have to deal with, and some of the questions are, man, you're using that wide gap hook. Isn't that a lot of metal hanging down off of the bottom there? Don't you have a lot of stuff hanging off the bottom? Well, yeah, that's true. There is a good bit of hanging down there, but it's round. I'm not catching any grass with it, so it's just rolling. It's rolling on by. I don't think a fish cares about this much, hanging down. If anything, if he sees that, it just looks like a wider profile, sort of a bait. One of the positive aspects of having that hook hang down is I've got a keel, so it doesn't have a tendency to roll nearly as much. So I've got a keel down here that kind of keeps my bait straight. Also, with this much wire, it also is slightly heavier. Even though this is a relatively, everything is kind of light, it's like it's going to sink really, really slowly. I've got a little bit of weight in that hook, so it is going to have a tendency to sink, a little bit. So I typically use a heavy wire hook if I can get it, with whichever brand or model of hook that I'm using. A little heavier wire hook, because we do have an awful lot of grass here. This is not really finesse fishing. So, but the extra wide gap giving me that little bit of keel. But the main thing is when that fish bites, I want as much of that part of the hook sticking out as possible. If I'm using a regular style hook, I may only get that much of the hook itself, sticking out of the bait. But with this wide gap, I got a whole lot of hook that sticks out that can find a place to penetrate that fish's mouth. So that wide gap hook, I think, is extraordinarily important, with this style bait. So one of the other key things when rigging this bait, whichever type hook you're using, it's nice and straight, just like you're hooking a worm, nice and straight. If you got little crooks or bends and that kind of a thing, you're going to have a tendency to twist. It's not going to look right coming through the water, and you may end up twisting your line, that kind of thing. I think you'll notice that I'm using fluorocarbon. Now, out here in Headwaters Lake, just like almost everybody, the locals and guides and everybody that fishes out here, I do use braid, but I'm one of those rare guys that always uses a fluorocarbon leader. We can talk about that another time, but that's why you see that fluorocarbon. So all of my reels are loaded with braid. I use 30-pound test. I'm not a heavy braid kind of a guy. I use Andy braid. You guys may have never heard of it. Andy's been around for 50 years, but they've mainly been a saltwater product. They've been making monofilament for years and years and years, and Andy holds more world records than any other fishing line, in the world. So, but it's it's more of a saltwater type of a brand. When I used to fish saltwater and I chased world records, I've captained or held 9 IGFA records. When I was chasing those records, it was always Andy, because that was the stuff that that was always the best for chasing records. So I'm a fan of that particular brand. 6 or 8 years ago, they started making braid. They were the first ones to make eight carrier braid. Most everybody else is making 4 carrier, so it was more round. Also, something different that that Andy does is they dye the individual strands, not the entire line once it's completed. So the strands are dyed. So once it all goes together, this stuff never fades. This is their gunmetal color. I think it's perfect for just about anywhere you fish. They also make a high vis, like a lime green, you know, sort of a color, but I'm not a high vis guy. It will stay this color forever. You know, it never fades, which is awesome. And in the tannic water that we've got here in headwaters, this line is man, this stuff is absolutely you know, invisible. So I'm using a 30-pound braid, and then I'm using a 30-pound fluorocarbon leader. Guess which brand? It's Andy, of course. I'm using 100% fluorocarbon leader, you know, on here. I use about 2 feet, and I'm using typically 30-inch leader or so, and a couple of different knots that I use, an FG knot or an approved Albright or something like that to tie these two things together. But we can talk about knots and leader another time. I just wanted to explain why you're seeing that that fluorocarbon on there. All right, so with this rig right here, with this particular one, this hook and this weight, I can fish anywhere in Headwaters Lake. We're talking about you know, anywhere from 2, 4, 6, 8 feet of depth. I'm throwing this thing in a hydrilla. I'm not fishing it in the pits or something like that. The bait's just not designed for that. So this bait's going to sink relatively slowly, but that's exactly what I want. I'm trying to mimic a dying bait fish. So I'm bringing it through that grass, and I'm going to let it mimic that dying fish. This particular one's called salt and pepper. You can see there's a lot of silver flake in there, those giant black flakes. That gives it some dimension. So I don't know, it looks like a crappie or you know shad or something like that. So so I want this bait to sink relatively slowly. So the way that I fish it is, if anybody that's fished with me before, you know that one of my mantras is jerk pause. So that's the exact same way that I fish this bait. I've got a video up on YouTube right now that's got some fish caught with this bait, and hopefully you can see the method there. So I'm going to throw this thing out. I'm going to let it settle in the hydrilla, and I'm going to give it a twitch, and then I'm going to let it fall, and it's going to fall really slowly. It's either going to touch the top of the grass or fall down in one of those holes, but I want it to fall relatively slowly. And then I'm going to give that twitch again, and I'm not giving it a hard jerk. I'm just giving it a twitch, which I'm expecting this bait to move maybe 24 inches, you know, during that course of that twitch. And while it's pausing, I can bring up the slack a little bit. Let it sit, and this is probably a 4 count. Twitch. 1, 2, 3, 4. Twitch. 1, 2, 3, 4. Twitch. 1, 2, 3, 4. Twitch. I'll break it up. I'll do 3 twitches, 2 twitches. I'll let it rest a little bit more. The fish have got to tell me how they want it, but that's typically how I start out. So that twitch during that pause, if it's in an open hole, that 4 count, this bait's going to sink about, it might sink 2 feet, 18 inches or 2 feet. If you threw it out in the middle of the pit in open water, it doesn't sink relatively flat fast. That's what I want. I want it to sink relatively slowly, like a shad or a shiner that's dying, and just sink it to the bottom. So it's going to sink about 2 feet with that 4 count. Even if it's not in a hole, even if I'm pulling it through the grass, boom, and it settles in the grass and it just sort of sits there. Again, there's no weight on it, so it's not burying itself down in the hydrilla. A fish will never find it if you bury it down in the hydrilla. You put a 1/4 ounce lead head on this thing, or a 3/8 or something, it's down in the hydrilla. A fish will never find it. Settles down just in the top of that hydrilla. Let it sit for those 4 seconds. That fish feels a vibration in that hydrilla. He can feel that vibration. Now I yank that thing, twitch, boom. A lot of times that's where I'm getting that strike, is on that twitch. Sometimes on the fall, sometimes while it's just resting, like a worm bite, tap. But more times than not, while that thing is resting during my little 4 count, and that first twitch, boom, that's when he hits it, because it's settled down in that grass. He's looking for it. He can't find it. Whatever. He's staring at it. As soon as it starts twitching, he grabs it. So that's a pretty typical way for me to fish the thing. When I have clients on the boat, that's exactly how I tell them to fish it. Now I talk about using the thing as a topwater, because I'm using no weight on this particular bait. If I want to walk this thing across the top a little bit, as soon as I cast it out, put the reel in gear and start twitching, this thing will come up to the top, and I can almost walk the dog with it. I can keep it on the surface. on a day when there's no wind, when I need a really quiet surface bait, when a popper or a spook is just too much, this is absolutely perfect. I can bring this thing up to the top, twitch, 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 and I can keep it right on the surface. And it's making a little bit of a wake, but it's not so noisy, you know, that that'll scare fish away. The cool thing is when I'm dragging it across the top and I come to an open hole, the hydrilla or something like that, I can let it fall. Same thing with the lily pads. This is absolutely perfect, pulling it across the top of the lily pads. Man, I'll chuck this thing out in the middle of the pads just like I would a frog or anything. And I'll walk it, jig it, jerk it across those lily pads, make a little bit of noise. But unlike a frog that's just gonna sit on top, when I get to a little hole, I can stop it and let it fall. So it looks like some kind of creature crawling across the pads, and then it just slowly starts to fall. Then because it's weedless, twitch, twitch, get it back up on top and let her go again. So super versatile bait. So twist lock hook and rig it weedless. So that's that. With the I tie a uni knot because I can do it in my sleep. It's a good strong knot, but with the screw lock hook, I'm using the that knot that holds it down tight. Okay, let's talk about here's one that's got a weighted hook, right? This is a big hook. This is probably an 8/0. If I do want to get down in that grass, or I am fishing a little bit deeper, I got the same possibility of using a weighted hook, something that's got a little bit of keel to it, so that I can keep that bait running straight. But if I really want it to get down, if I'm fishing in some deeper water, like the edges of the pits, or you know, something like that, or if I don't necessarily want to use a worm, but I do want to get something down a little bit deeper, that this weighted hook you know, is a way to go. It's ideal. I'm not going to use anything bigger than 1/4 ounce. I'm going to use, you know, some of the lighter weights, because again, man, I don't want to bury the thing down in the hydrilla. You know, I may want to get down it a little bit deeper, or diving down in those deeper holes, but I don't want to bury it down in the hydrilla. So that's where that keel comes from. Okay, another style hook is your basic weedless you know, worm hook. This is one that's got this little extra doodad keeper thing on here. So I'll use this hook when I need this thing to be uber weedless, when I'm really needing the thing to be weedless. So hook this like a regular worm. I'm going to go through the tip, come out just a little bit, right, slide it on around just like you would a regular worm hook. Goes over the little doodad. The little doodad keeps it from sliding back down, you know, like that. I've seen guys use bobber stops, or, you know, things like that to do that same thing. I can rig this guy kind of the same way. All right. The thing about this type of a rig, if you look on the very tip of the bait, there's nothing sticking out. Here, I got all this jazz, you know, sticking out. So this stuff has a tendency to grab the grass a little bit. Every once in a while, it'll start getting hung in the grass, or, you know, that kind of stuff. So if I'm having trouble with grass getting stuck on the tip, you know, or something like that, and it's just, you know, not acting like I want, then I'll switch to you know, to a hook like this. This is great. The only problem is it tends to tear with this style a hook, whether it's a worm hook with a little doodad, or whether it's just a regular worm hook. I tend to tear them, so I go through you know, more baits that way. So, you know, I'm just going through too many. All right, I want to show you a different way to hook, excuse me, to tie this one. This one, because it's not the screw lock, even with the screw lock, I want to give the thing as much action as possible. I want the thing to jump around and wiggle and move. You know, it's supposed to be all over the place. But with that screw lock, you know, I have the problem with it twisting around the screw lock, so I'm not able to tie a loop knot to give it some extra, you know, action. But with this style hook, with a weedless worm hook, I can do that. So I'm going to show you my loop knot. All over the internet. I'm going to do it really quick, just so you can get an idea what it looks like. But you can look this thing up on you know, on the internet. There's a million different YouTube videos or whatever on how to tie this thing. So I'm going to show you real quick, just as quick and dirty, and I'm going to put it on that hook, so you just get an idea what it looks like. So it's an overhand knot, right? Just a regular overhand knot with about 2 inches of tag hanging down there. So this is my tag in, right? Going to go through the knot, through the eye of the hook, right? I pull that overhand knot down pretty close to the eye of the hook. I'm going to go through the hole. Bunny rabbit goes through the hole, right? He goes around the tree. I go around the main line, and then I go back in the same way that I came out, right? Let me do it again. Try to keep my chubby fingers out of the way. So I got a loop knot, excuse me, just an overhand knot. Line goes in it, goes around the main line, and then goes back in to that same knot. I kind of push everything down and snug it up tight, give it a little lube, pull everything tight. All right, I tied it right when the tag end is facing down. So if the tag end is facing down, then I did it the right way. Then we're gonna just take the old snipperoos, and I'm gonna snip off that extra tag end, hook her all back together. Now I got nothing sticking out except for my little bitty loop to get hung in the grass. So this is really great for keeping the thing from getting hung in the grass. That loop knot, nice and loose, you know, give this thing plenty of opportunity to jump around and you know, and do its thing. And that's a strong knot. It's you know, it's one that I think a lot of guys use for flies, you know, that kind of stuff. But it works perfect right here. It gives me some this bait room to jump around and, you know, kind of do its thing. So colors. This is two ends of the spectrum right here. So I've got a super red flake June bug, and then I go back to my salt and pepper. Salt and pepper is what I'm throwing 90% of the time. This is this bait out here on Headwaters is just it works. You know, it works. You know, it works for me. I've got a handful of colors that I use. I've got another one that's golden brim, that's a little more gold. You know, that looks a lot like a golden shiner. But day in and day out, you know, this color right here is just has been fantastic out here. So whichever colors you choose, more natural colors. You know, you don't need bubblegum or methylate or any of those wild, you know, shocker colors, that kind of a thing. I think things that are a little more you know, a little more natural are you know, are going to work best out here. So that's my flukes. When do I throw a fluke? Man, I have a fluke tied on all the time. I think it's one of the most versatile baits out there. You know, if I'm going to have 3 or 4 different baits, you know, tied on during the beginning of the day, I'm going to have a top water tied on. I'm going to have a chatterbait, you know, tied on, and I'm going to have a fluke tied on. And that fluke's going to stay on, you know, all day, because there's not an opportunity, you know, where this is not going to, I'm going to be able to use this at some point during the day, either throwing it through the hydrilla or throwing it up next to the reeds, or, you know, or something like that. You know, shallow water, deep water, fish come up to the top, chasing some shad or whatever. This is an incredibly versatile bait. I'm sure it'll work on your lake as well, but here at Headwaters, this is one of those things you know, just go to. You've got to have these in your box, and hopefully, you know, these little tips will help you put more fish in the boat. So if you want to hear more tips and things out here at Headwaters Lake, make sure, I guess, subscribe, so you know, you'll get the message whenever I'm putting new videos up. I'm going to try to make sure and talk about the things that I use on a daily basis out here, and hopefully it'll help you guys put more fish in the boat. Captain Andrew, thanks.